The distress signal came at 3 in the morning, station time. Danny Cole was asleep in his quarters when the alarm pulled him from his dreams. He rolled out of bed, rubbed his eyes, and made his way to the command center of Horizon 7. The research station was small, home to only 3 humans. It floated in orbit around a massive gas giant in the system, far from Earth and far from help. Danny worked as the chief, studying alien life forms that the Galactic Union sent his way. It was quiet work, lonely work, but he liked it that way. Lisa Grant was already at the control panel when he arrived. She was the security officer, a woman in her late 20s with short brown hair and sharp eyes that never seemed to miss anything. She had served in the Earth Defense Force before taking this assignment, and she carried herself like someone who had seen combat and survived it. Park stumbled in a moment later. He was the youngest of the 3, the communications specialist who kept them connected to the rest of the galaxy. He was thin and nervous by nature, but he was good at his job and loyal to his. Lisa pointed at the screen. A ship was drifting about 2 hours away from their position. It was alien in design, belonging to a species called the distress signal was automated, repeating the same message over and over. Something had gone wrong on board and there were no life signs. Danny made the call to investigate. It was standard protocol. They could not ignore a distress signal, even if the ship appeared to be dead. They suited up, took their shuttle, and flew out to meet the drifting vessel. The ship was dark when they boarded it. Emergency lights cast a red glow over the corridors, and the air was cold and stale. Lisa went first with her weapon drawn. Danny followed with his scanner and stayed close behind, his hands shaking slightly. They found the first body in the corridor outside the engine room. It was a tall creature with gray skin and 4 arms. Its face was frozen in an expression of pure terror, eyes wide open, mouth stretched in a silent scream. Danny had seen death before, but nothing like this. The creature looked like it had been scared to death. They found 6 more bodies as they moved through the ship. All of them wore the same expression. All of them had died in fear so intense that their hearts had simply stopped. There were no wounds, no signs of violence, no indication of what had caused such horror. Lisa found the containment unit in the cargo hold. It was a large metal box with thick walls and heavy locks. The door was open, torn from its hinges by something strong enough to bend metal. Whatever had been inside was gone. Picked up a signal on his communicator. It was a priority message from the Galactic Union, sent to all ships in the sector. The message was short and urgent. I had escaped from a transport vessel. All crews were warned to evacuate the area immediately. Danny felt his stomach drop. He knew what it was, every knew. It was called the fear beast by most species in the galaxy, a predator unlike any other. It did not hunt with claws or teeth. It hunted with terror itself. There was a creature that existed partially in the psychic dimension. It could sense fear and amplify it, turning small worries into overwhelming panic. It fed on the terror of its prey, growing stronger as they grew weaker. Most species died within minutes of encountering one. Their hearts gave out, their minds broke, and they fell dead without the creature ever touching them. Lisa grabbed Danny by the arm. They needed to leave, right now. They ran back to their shuttle, sealed the door, and flew back to Horizon 7 as fast as the engines would carry them. But when they arrived, Danny knew something was wrong. The station felt different. The air was colder, and there was a weight pressing down on them that had nothing to do with gravity. Lisa checked the sensors and went pale. Something had come aboard while they were docked with the ship. Something had slipped through the airlock without triggering a single alarm. That was already inside Horizon 7. Wanted to call for help. Lisa told him to do it, and he sent out an emergency signal on all frequencies. The response came back within minutes. Help was on the way, but the nearest ship was 3 days out. They would have to survive for 3 days with a fear beast hunting them. Danny tried to think. He pulled up everything he knew about on his computer. The information was limited because so few had survived to report back. The creature was patient. It enjoyed the hunt. It would stalk its prey for hours or even days, feeding on their growing terror before finally delivering the killing blow. The lights in the corridor flickered. Lisa raised her weapon and pointed it at the darkness. Pressed himself against the wall, his breathing rapid and shallow. Danny felt fear creeping up his spine, cold and heavy, wrapping around his thoughts like a snake. And then he saw it. They emerged from the shadows at the end of the corridor. It was not solid, not entirely. It looked like a shifting mass of darkness, a shadow that had come to life. It had no eyes that Danny could see, but he knew it was looking at them. He knew it was hungry. The fear hit him like a wave. Suddenly he was a child again, alone in the dark, terrified of monsters under his bed. He saw his parents dying. He saw the station exploding. He saw himself floating in the void of space, screaming without sound. Lisa fired her weapon. The blast passed right through the creature without effect. They seemed to laugh, a sound that existed only in their minds, cold and mocking. Fell to his knees, clutching his chest. His heart was racing too fast, pushed by fear beyond what his body could handle. Danny grabbed him and pulled him back, shouting at Lisa to retreat. They ran. They sealed themselves in the medical bay and locked the door behind them, was gasping for air, his face white as paper. Lisa was shaking but still on her feet, still ready to fight even though her weapon was useless. Danny sat down against the wall and tried to catch his breath. The fear was still there, pressing against his mind, but he was still alive. They were all still alive. 3 days. They had to survive for 3 days. The lights flickered again and the temperature dropped. There was outside the door waiting. It had all the time in the world. It would feed on their fear slowly, savoring every moment. But Danny noticed something as he sat there trembling. He was afraid, more afraid than he had ever been in his life. But he was not dead. His heart was still beating. His mind was still working. He wondered why that was. He wondered if it mattered. The hunt had begun. The medical bay became their refuge, but it did not feel safe. The walls were thin and the door was just metal. Danny knew that neither would stop if it truly wanted to enter. The creature was playing with them, enjoying the hunt, letting their fear grow ripe before the harvest. Lay on one of the beds, his breathing slowly returning to normal. Lisa had given him something to calm his heart, a mild sedative that took the edge off his panic. He was still afraid, they all were, but at least he was no longer in danger of his heart giving out. Lisa paced back and forth, her weapon still in her hand even though she knew it was useless. She was a soldier, trained to fight, but there was nothing to fight here. They existed in a space between the physical and the psychic. Bullets and energy blasts meant nothing to it. Danny sat at the computer terminal, reading everything he could find about the creature. The files were incomplete, filled with more questions than answers. They had been encountered by dozens of species across the galaxy. None of them had survived for long. The crew had lasted 4 hours. A research team had made it 6 hours before the last of them died screaming. The longest recorded survival time belonged to a group of traders who had held out for nearly 12 hours before their minds shattered. 3 days seemed impossible. The lights flickered and the temperature dropped another few degrees. Danny felt the fear pressing against his thoughts again, trying to worm its way deeper into his mind. He saw flashes of terrible things, images of death and loss and suffering. He saw his mother in a hospital bed. He saw his childhood home burning. He saw himself alone, abandoned, forgotten by everyone who had ever loved him. He pushed the images away and focused on the screen in front of him. That was trying to break him, but he was not going to let it. Not yet. Lisa stopped packing and looked at Danny. She asked if there was any weakness, any way to fight the creature. Danny shook his head. Every species that had tried to fight had failed. It could not be hurt by physical weapons because most of its body existed in a dimension humans could not reach. It could not be reasoned with because it did not think like other creatures. It only hunted. It only fed. Spoke up from the bed. His voice was weak, but there was a question in it. He asked why they were still alive. They had died in hours. They had been facing for nearly 2 hours now, and they were still breathing. Danny had been wondering the same thing. He turned back to the computer and started searching for information about human psychology, about how humans experienced fear compared to other species. The answer, when he found it, was both simple and strange. Humans came from a death world. Earth was a planet filled with predators, natural disasters, diseases, and 1,000 other ways to die. Humans had evolved not to avoid fear but to live with it. Fear was a constant companion for their ancestors, a warning system that kept them alive long enough to reproduce. Other species had evolved differently. They came from a peaceful world with few predators. They lived in underground cities where danger was rare. When these species felt fear, it was an emergency, a signal that something had gone terribly wrong. Their bodies were not designed to handle prolonged terror. But humans were different. Humans had spent millions of years being afraid of lions and bears and snakes and storms. They had developed the ability to feel fear and still function, to be terrified and still think, to panic and still act. They did not kill with its claws. It killed by overwhelming its prey with terror until their bodies simply gave up. But human bodies were built to endure terror. They could be afraid for days, weeks, even years and still survive. Danny shared his discovery with Lisa, and it was not much, but it was something. They might not be able to fight though, but they might be able to outlast it. Lisa was skeptical. She pointed out that they were still terrified, still suffering. There was still feeding on them, and 3 days was a long time to be afraid. Danny agreed, but he had noticed something else in the research files. There was a predator, and like all predators, it needed energy. It spent energy when it generated its fear fields. When prey died quickly, the creature could feed and recover. But what happened when prey did not die? What happened when the hunt dragged on and on without a kill? He suggested that they could tire the out. If they refused to break, if they kept enduring, the creature would have to keep spending energy to attack them. Eventually, it would exhaust itself. Asked how they were supposed to endure, the fear was overwhelming. Every moment felt like torture. He did not know if he could take 3 more days of this. Danny did not have a good answer. He only knew that they had to try. They attacked again that night. It came through the walls like smoke, filling the room with darkness and cold. Danny saw his worst nightmares made real. He saw himself failing, losing everything, dying alone and unmourned. He fell to his knees and screamed. Lisa stood her ground. She had been trained to function under fire, to keep moving even when every instinct told her to run. She grabbed Danny and pulled him up, shouting at him to focus, to breathe, to remember that it was not real. Curled into a ball on the bed, crying softly. They whispered to him, telling him that he was worthless, that his friends would abandon him, that no one had ever truly loved him. The attack lasted for an hour. When it finally ended, all 3 of them were shaking, exhausted, barely able to stand. But they were alive. They retreated into the shadows, watching them with something that might have been curiosity. It had never encountered prey like this before. It had never had to work so hard for a kill. Danny forced himself to stand up straight. His body ached, and his mind felt bruised, but he was still thinking. He looked at the darkness where they waited and made a silent promise. He was not going to die here. None of them were. They would endure, they would suffer, and they would survive. The creature seemed to sense his resolve. The temperature dropped even further, and the shadows grew darker. It was hungry, and it was willing to wait. But so were they. The second day was worse than the first. They had learned that quick attacks did not work on these strange creatures, so it changed its approach. Instead of hitting them with waves of terror, it settled into a constant pressure, a low hum of dread that never stopped. Danny could feel it in his bones, a weight that made every movement exhausting. His thoughts kept drifting to dark places, to memories he had buried long ago, to fears he had never spoken out loud. He had to fight just to focus on simple tasks. Lisa was holding up better than the others, but even she was showing signs of strain. Her hands trembled when she thought no one was watching. Her eyes kept darting to the shadows, searching for movement that might not be there. Was the worst off? He had always been anxious by nature, and had found every weak spot in his mind. He barely spoke anymore. He sat on the bed with his arms wrapped around his knees, rocking slowly back and forth. Danny knew they needed a new plan. Simply enduring was not enough. They needed to fight back somehow, even if they could not hurt the creature directly. He thought about what he knew, the fed on fear. It grew stronger when its prey was terrified and weaker when they were calm. But how could anyone be calm when a monster was hunting them? Lisa had an idea. She remembered her training in the Earth Defense Force. Soldiers were taught to function under extreme stress, to control their breathing and focus their minds even when everything was falling apart. She suggested they try using those techniques. It sounded simple, almost too simple, but they had nothing else to try. Lisa started teaching them. She showed them how to breathe slowly and deeply, how to count their heartbeats, how to focus on the present moment instead of the horrors in their minds. It was basic stuff, the kind of thing taught to new recruits on their first day. They seemed to notice what they were doing. The pressure increased, the shadows grew darker, and terrible images flooded their minds. Danny saw his sister dying in a car accident. Lisa saw her squad being slaughtered by enemy fire, saw himself being mocked and rejected by everyone he had ever trusted. But they kept breathing, they kept counting, they kept focusing. Something strange happened. The fear did not go away, but it became smaller, more manageable. It was still there, still pressing against them, but they could think around it now. They could function. Danny felt a spark of hope. It was small, barely a flicker, but it was there. They were not helpless. They could fight back, not with weapons, but with their own minds. They attacked again that afternoon. It appeared in the center of the medical bay, a mass of shifting darkness that seemed to absorb all light. Its presence filled the room with cold, and Danny felt his heart rate spike. Lisa stood up and faced the creature directly. She planted her feet, squared her shoulders, and breathed. The hit her with everything it had. She saw her worst memories, felt her deepest fears, experienced every nightmare she had ever had all at once. She did not run, she did not fall. She stood there, trembling, crying, but still on her feet. They seemed confused. This was not how prey was supposed to behave. Prey was supposed to break. Prey was supposed to die. This creature was suffering, obviously terrified, but it would not stop resisting. Danny watched with amazement as Lisa held her ground for nearly 10 minutes. When the attack finally stopped, she collapsed to her knees, gasping for air. But she was alive and she was smiling. She had proved that it was possible. They could face thee and survive. Found his courage somewhere in that moment. He had watched Lisa stand against the monster and something inside him shifted. He was still afraid, more afraid than he had ever been, but he did not want to be the weak one anymore. He did not want to let his friends down. He asked Danny to tell him about human history. He wanted to know about other times when humans had faced impossible odds and survived. Danny was surprised by the request, but he understood what needed. He needed to remember that humans were survivors. Danny started talking. He told about the Ice Ages, when humans had nearly gone extinct but kept fighting to survive. He talked about the great plagues that killed millions but never managed to wipe out the species completely. He described wars and famines and natural disasters, all the terrible things that should have ended humanity but never did. Listened, and something in his eyes changed. He was still afraid, but now there was something else there too. Pride, maybe, or determination. They attacked again that night, targeting specifically. It showed him visions of abandonment and failure. It told him that he was nothing, that he would die alone and forgotten. Responded by reciting every person who had ever believed in him. His mother who had worked 2 jobs to send him to school. His teacher who had encouraged him to pursue his dreams. His friends back on Earth who had thrown him a party when he got this assignment. But could not understand it. This creature was clearly terrified, clearly in pain, but it kept finding reasons to resist. It kept finding strength in the strangest places. By the end of the second day, the 3 humans were exhausted but still alive. They was frustrated. It had never hunted prey like this before. Most creatures broke within hours. These humans had been fighting for over 30 hours, and they showed no signs of giving up. Danny noticed something as he prepared to rest. The attacks were slightly weaker than before. The creature was still terrifying, still overwhelming, but there was a difference. It was subtle, easy to miss if you were not paying attention. He shared his observation with Lisa, and the was getting tired. It was spending energy on every attack, and without killing them, it had no way to recover. They could win this, they just had to keep enduring. Lisa nodded and closed her eyes to rest, curled up on the bed, still afraid but no longer broken. Danny stayed awake a little longer, watching the shadows. It was out there, waiting, but for the first time since this nightmare began, Danny was not afraid of what would happen next. He was almost looking forward to it. The third day began with Danny making a decision. They had been hiding in the medical bay for too long, waiting for the to attack, reacting instead of acting. It was time to change the rules. He gathered Lisa and explained his plan. They would take shifts confronting the directly. One person would face the creature while the other 2 rested. By rotating through, they could maintain their strength while forcing the to keep expending energy. Lisa agreed immediately. She was tired of hiding, tired of feeling like prey. She wanted to take the fight to the monster, even if the fight was just sitting still and refusing to break. Was more hesitant. The idea of facing the alone terrified him, but he looked at his friends, at the people who had stood by him through the worst 2 days of his life, and he nodded. He would do his part. Lisa took the first shift. She walked out into the corridor, sat down cross-legged in the middle of the floor, and waited. They came to her almost immediately, rising from the shadows like smoke from a fire. The creature seemed almost eager. Finally, one of the prey had separated from the others. This would be easy. It was not easy. Lisa had prepared herself mentally for the attack. She breathed slowly, counted her heartbeats, and focused on the feeling of the cold floor beneath her. When the fear hit, she acknowledged it without letting it control her. Yes, she was afraid. Yes, she might die. But she had faced death before and she was still here. It showed her visions of her fallen comrades. It replayed the worst day of her military career, the day when her squad had been ambushed and she had been the only survivor. It whispered that their deaths were her fault, that she had failed them, that she deserved to join them. Lisa felt the guilt and the grief wash over her. She had carried these feelings for years, hidden them deep inside, pretended they did not exist. Now they were exposed, raw and painful. But she did not break. She let herself feel the pain, accepted it as part of who she was, and then let it pass through her. Her squad had died, yes. That was a tragedy she would carry forever, but their deaths did not define her. How she chose to live did. They could not understand this. The prey was supposed to be destroyed by its worst memories. Instead, this creature was using those memories as a source of strength. Lisa held her ground for 4 hours. When she finally returned to the medical bay, she was pale and shaking, but she was also calm. She had faced her demons and survived. Took the next shift. He was trembling as he walked into the corridor, his heart racing so fast he could hear it in his ears. They descended on him immediately, sensing his weakness, expecting an easy victory. The creature showed him every rejection he had ever experienced. Every time he had been overlooked, ignored, or dismissed. Every moment when he had felt small and worthless. It told him that no one truly cared about him, that his friends only tolerated him out of pity. Wanted to believe the lies. Part of him had always believed them. He had spent his whole life feeling like he was not good enough, like he did not deserve the good things that happened to him. But then he thought about Lisa walking out of the corridor, exhausted but unbroken. He thought about Danny staying up late to research, trying to find any way to help them survive. These people were risking their lives alongside him. They were counting on him. Maybe he was not worthless after all. Maybe that was wrong. Started talking out loud. He listed every achievement in his life, every obstacle he had overcome, every time he had surprised himself with his own strength. He talked about getting the highest score in his class at the academy. He talked about the time he had fixed a critical communication relay while the station was falling apart around him. He talked about being chosen for this mission out of hundreds of applicants. They tried to drown him out with more visions of failure, but kept talking. His voice grew stronger as he continued, and the fear began to recede. He lasted 3 hours. When he returned to the medical bay, there were tears on his face, but he was smiling. He had done it. He had faced the monster alone and survived. Danny took the final shift. He walked into the corridor with a strange sense of calm. He had watched his friends face their worst fears and come back stronger. Now it was his turn. It was waiting for him. The creature looked different now, less solid than before. Its edges were fuzzy, and its darkness was not quite as deep. Danny realized that the monster was tired. 2 days of constant hunting without a kill had taken their toll. The creature tried a different approach. Instead of attacking with fear, it offered peace. It whispered to Danny that he could end the suffering right now. All he had to do was give up, let go, stop fighting. The fear would stop and he could finally rest. Danny almost laughed. He had spent his entire career studying alien life, trying to understand creatures that thought differently than humans. Now he finally understood the creature was not evil. It was not cruel. It was simply a predator doing what predators did. It could not understand why its prey refused to die because it had never encountered creatures that could endure so much suffering and keep going. Danny explained this speaking out loud to the darkness. He told the creature about humanity, about their history of survival against impossible odds. He told it about human stubbornness, about the way humans would keep fighting even when there was no hope left. It listened, or at least it seemed to. Its attacks grew weaker as Danny spoke, its form flickering like a candle in the wind. Danny finished with a human saying, "What does not kill me makes me stronger." They had been trying to kill them with fear for nearly 3 days. All it had accomplished was making them more resistant to its attacks. The creature retreated into the shadows, and Danny returned to the medical bay. Only 12 more hours until rescue arrived. They could do this. They were going to survive. The final hours were the hardest. The knew that rescue was coming, knew that its prey was about to escape. It gathered everything it had left and prepared for one last assault. Danny felt the change in the air before the attack began. The temperature dropped so low that frost formed on the walls. The shadows deepened until the corridor outside the medical bay was completely black. And then the fear hit them, all three at once, stronger than anything they had experienced before. They combined their nightmares into a single terrible vision. They saw Earth burning, humanity extinct, every person they had ever loved dead and gone. They saw themselves as the last three humans in the universe, alone and forgotten in a galaxy that did not care whether they lived or died. Danny fell to his knees. Lisa gasped and grabbed the edge of a bed to keep from falling, cried out and pressed his hands against his temples. The vision was overwhelming. It felt more real than reality, more vivid than any dream. Danny could smell the smoke from the burning cities. He could hear the screams of the dying. He could feel the absolute emptiness of a universe without humanity. But then something happened. Lisa reached out and grabbed Danny's hand. Danny reached for. The three of them formed a circle, holding onto each other, anchoring themselves to something real. Lisa started talking. She described her favorite place on Earth, a small beach in California where she had spent summers as a child. She talked about the smell of salt water and sunscreen, the sound of waves crashing against the shore, the feeling of warm sand between her toes. Danny joined in. He talked about his grandmother's kitchen, about the smell of fresh bread and the sound of her laughter. He talked about sitting at her table as a child, feeling safe and loved and happy. Spoke last. His voice was shaky, but he pushed through. He talked about his first day at the academy, about the excitement and the fear and the overwhelming sense of possibility. He talked about looking up at the stars and knowing that he was going to explore them someday. They could not understand what was happening. It was pouring everything into this attack, every bit of energy it had left, and the prey was not breaking. They were sitting in a circle, holding hands, and talking about memories that had nothing to do with the nightmare it was creating. The creature pushed harder, but something was wrong. Its form was flickering badly now, and its attacks were growing weaker. It had been hunting for nearly 3 days without feeding. It had spent enormous amounts of energy trying to break these stubborn creatures, and now it had nothing left. Danny noticed the change first. The fear was fading, not disappearing but becoming manageable again. He opened his eyes and looked at the shadows. It was still there, but it was barely visible now, a faint outline where once there had been solid darkness. He stood up slowly, still holding Lisa's hand, rose beside them. Together, the three humans faced the creature that had terrorized them for 3 days. Danny spoke to it gently. He told them that it had made a mistake. It had chosen the wrong prey. Humans were not like other species. They did not die easily. They did not give up easily. They were survivors, the children of a death world, and they had learned to live with fear a long time ago. They tried to respond, tried to summon one more attack, but there was nothing left. Its form wavered, flickered, and then began to collapse in on itself. The creature was not dying, Danny realized. It was going dormant, like a battery that had been completely drained. Lisa watched with amazement as the fear beast, the terror of the galaxy, slowly settled to the floor and stopped moving. It looked almost peaceful now, just a pool of shadow no bigger than a sleeping dog. Laughed. It was a strange sound after everything they had been through, but he could not help it. The monster that had hunted them for 3 days had just fallen asleep because it was too tired to stay awake. Danny checked the time. The rescue ship was less than an hour away. They had done it. They had survived. The three of them sat down against the wall and waited. The fear was gone now, replaced by exhaustion and relief and something that might have been pride. They had faced the fear beast and won, not through strength or weapons but through simple human stubbornness. When the rescue ship arrived, a team of alien soldiers came aboard with heavy weapons and protective gear. They expected to find bodies. Instead, they found 3 tired humans sitting around what looked like a sleeping shadow. The team leader, a tall with blue skin and wide eyes, asked what had happened. Danny explained as simply as he could. They had attacked them. They had refused to die. Eventually, the creature had gotten tired and fallen asleep. They stared at him for a long moment. Then it started laughing, a deep booming sound that filled the corridor. It said that humans were truly insane. No other species in recorded history had ever survived an attack, let alone one by boring the creature into dormancy. Lisa shrugged. She said that humans were stubborn that way. They did not know when to quit. It was carefully collected and placed in a new containment unit, one with much stronger locks. Danny watched it go and felt a strange sense of respect for the creature. It had been a worthy opponent, in its own terrible way. The news spread quickly through the Galactic Union. The species called humans, the newcomers from the small blue planet, had done the impossible. They had survived an attack through sheer endurance. Scientists wanted to study them. Military leaders wanted to recruit them. Everyone wanted to understand how these soft, short-lived creatures had managed to outlast a predator that had killed millions across the galaxy. Danny did not have a complicated answer. Humans came from a planet that tried to kill them every day. They had evolved to be afraid and keep going anyway. Fear was not their enemy. It was their oldest companion. The official report listed the incident as a victory for human resilience. But among the crew of Horizon 7, they had a different name for it. They called it the night they bored a monster to sleep. Suggested they put it on a plaque. Lisa said she would rather forget the whole thing. Danny just smiled and looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, others were hunting other prey. But the galaxy had learned an important lesson. If you wanted to scare a human to death, you had better bring a lot of patience. Because humans had learned to sleep with monsters under their beds a long time ago. And they were not afraid of the dark anymore.